The $17,000 Italian leather sofa was now decorated with what appeared to be an entire container of grape juice, strategically applied in swooping arcs that would have impressed Jackson Pollock. Preston Montgomery Blackwell III stood in the doorway of his Beverly Hills mansion this gray October morning, watching the latest casualty of his domestic battlefield gather her belongings with trembling hands. "Mr. Blackwell, I cannot," Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked as she stuffed her cardigan into her purse, ignoring the sticky purple handprint someone had pressed onto her shoulder. "In 40 years of childcare, I have never encountered." A wet sock sailed through the air, landing with a splat against the crystal chandelier. Mrs. Patterson flinched and quickened her pace toward the door. Preston ran his fingers through his dark hair, the silver threads at his temples catching the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 38, he looked every inch the successful tech mogul, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, shoulders that filled out his custom navy suit, but right now he felt like a man drowning in his own home. "Mrs. Patterson, please. I'll double your salary. No amount of money is worth this." She gestured toward the living room where suspicious giggling echoed from behind the overturned coffee table. "Those children need professional help, not a babysitter." The front door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the marble entryway like a gunshot. Preston closed his eyes and counted to 10, a habit he'd developed after his wife Catherine's death 18 months ago. It wasn't working anymore. "Daddy!" 6-year-old Harper's voice rang out, sweet as honey and twice as dangerous. Mrs. Patterson forgot her teeth. Preston opened his eyes to find Harper holding up a set of dentures, her blue eyes, so like her mother's, sparkling with mischief. Her blonde curls were sticky with what looked like maple syrup, and her pink dress was inside out and backwards. "Harper Catherine Blackwell, where did you?" Preston stopped himself. He knew exactly where she'd gotten them, and asking would only encourage more elaborate explanations involving dental fairies and tooth missions. "We were just helping her eat better," said Quinn, Harper's identical twin, appearing from behind the marble pillar with dirt under her fingernails and a completely innocent expression. "She kept making those clicky sounds." The third member of their trio, Hunter, crawled out from under the grand piano wearing nothing but Superman underwear and a bath towel cape. At 6 years old, he was the unofficial leader of their resistance movement against all forms of adult authority. "She said we were devils," Hunter announced, striking a superhero pose. "So we showed her our superpowers." Preston sank into the one piece of furniture still standing upright, a wingback chair that had somehow escaped the morning's carnage. His children stood before him like tiny blonde warriors, their faces streaked with various food items and their clothes in various states of disarray, but their eyes bright with a kind of energy that could power small cities. They were beautiful. They were brilliant. They were absolutely, completely out of control. And they were his kids. Preston's voice carried the exhaustion of 47 failed babysitters in 18 months. "Mrs. Patterson was a nice lady. We don't take people's teeth." "She wasn't nice," Quinn said matter-of-factly, climbing onto the arm of his chair. "Nice people don't call us names." Harper nodded solemnly. "And she wouldn't let us make breakfast art." "That's called making a mess, sweetheart." "Art is messy, Daddy. Mommy said so." The mention of Catherine hit Preston like it always did, swift and sharp, stealing his breath for just a moment. The triplets had been 4 when she died, old enough to remember her, young enough to expect her return. Their behavior had grown progressively worse as that expectation faded into anger, then hurt, then this creative rebellion against anyone who tried to take her place. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Emergency board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Cannot reschedule. Preston stared at the message, then at his children, then at the grape juice still dripping from his chandelier. He had 3 hours to find someone, anyone, willing to watch 3 small tornadoes who had collectively destroyed more furniture than a natural disaster. "Daddy!" Hunter's voice was smaller now, the superhero bravado fading. "Are you mad at us?" Preston looked at his son, really looked at him. Under the syrup and the backwards cape, Hunter's lower lip was trembling just slightly. Quinn had gone quiet, picking at a loose thread on her dress. Harper clutched the dentures tighter, as if they were a shield. "They weren't devils. They were scared, grieving children who had learned that if they were difficult enough, maybe Daddy wouldn't leave them too. "I'm not mad," Preston said softly, opening his arms. All 3 children tumbled into his lap, sticky fingers and syrup-covered hair and all. I need help, guys. We all need help." "We don't need help," Harper whispered against his chest. "We need Mommy." Preston's throat tightened. "I know, baby girl. I know." 25 miles away in Inglewood, Grace Washington checked her reflection in the rearview mirror of her 10-year-old Honda Civic. Her dark brown eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from too many interviews for positions that never materialized. Too many "we'll call you back" responses that never came. Too many doors closed before she could prove what she was capable of. At 28, Grace had been caring for children for 6 years, working her way through USC with babysitting jobs, then building a solid reputation among middle-class families in her neighborhood. She had references, credentials, and more patience than most people thought humanly possible. What she didn't have was the right zip code, the right connections, or apparently the right look for the families who could afford to pay what she was worth. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Grace Washington speaking." "Miss Washington? This is Bradley Chen from Elite Childcare Services. Are you still available for immediate placement?" Grace's heart jumped. Elite Childcare was the agency that handled the wealthy families, the ones who paid enough for her to finally move out of her studio apartment and maybe, eventually, finish her master's degree in child psychology. "Yes, absolutely. What's the situation?" "Emergency placement. Single father, 3 6-year-old triplets. Previous babysitter just left. The position starts immediately if you're interested." "What happened to the previous babysitter?" There was a long pause. "Miss Washington, I'll be completely honest with you. This family has been through 47 babysitters in 18 months. The children are challenging." Grace smiled for the first time in weeks. "Mr. Chen, I've worked with children who've been through trauma, children with behavioral issues, children who've been failed by every adult in their lives. Challenging doesn't scare me. The salary is substantial, but the family requests a 48-hour trial period." "I'll take it." Another pause. "Miss Washington, you should know. None of the previous candidates lasted more than 2 days. Are you certain you want to? Text me the address. I'll be there in an hour." Grace hung up and started her car, her hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Grace pulled her Honda into the circular driveway of 1247 Sunset Plaza Drive and sat for a moment, staring up at the glass and stone mansion that seemed to pierce the October sky. The house was beautiful in that cold architectural magazine way, all clean lines and expensive materials that whispered rather than shouted their worth. But something felt wrong. The front lawn was pristine except for what appeared to be a trail of cereal leading from the front door to a decorative fountain. A red tricycle sat abandoned halfway up the marble steps, and one of the tall windows on the second floor had what looked like finger paintings pressed against the glass from the inside. Grace grabbed her worn leather messenger bag and walked toward the front door, stepping carefully around scattered Cheerios. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door swung open to reveal a man who looked like he'd been through a natural disaster. Preston Blackwell stood in the doorway, his navy suit wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled, and his blue eyes holding the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. He was handsome in that sharp corporate way that usually intimidated Grace, but right now he just looked like a dad who was barely hanging on. "Miss Washington?" His voice carried a mixture of hope and resignation. "I'm Preston Blackwell." "Grace," she said, extending her hand. His handshake was firm but distracted, like he was listening for sounds of destruction from somewhere in the house. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Thank you for coming. I should warn you, my children are." Preston paused, searching for words that wouldn't send her running before she'd even stepped inside. "They're going through a difficult phase." A crash echoed from somewhere inside the house, followed by the sound of running water and high-pitched giggling. "How long has this phase been going on?" Grace asked, following him into the marble foyer. 18 months. Preston's shoulders sagged slightly. Since their mother died. Grace's expression softened immediately. I'm sorry for your loss. Something shifted in Preston's face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd offered condolences instead of making excuses to leave. Thank you. I should probably tell you what you're walking into. The children have very strong personalities, and they've been resistant to childcare providers. Resistant how? Before Preston could answer, a small blonde girl appeared at the top of the curved staircase, wearing a tutu, rain boots, and what appeared to be a tiara made of aluminum foil. She studied Grace with bright blue eyes that missed nothing. Are you the new babysitter? Harper called down, her voice carrying the authority of someone much older than 6. I'm Grace, she called back. What's your name? Harper Catherine Blackwell, and you won't last 2 days. Grace smiled. Why is that? Because we're impossible, Harper said matter-of-factly. Everyone says so. Impossible seems like a strong word for someone who's only 6. Harper's eyes narrowed. We're very advanced for our age. A second blonde head appeared beside Harper's, Quinn, identical except for a band-aid on her chin and what looked like paint in her hair. She's pretty, Quinn announced. The pretty ones usually cry faster. Grace laughed, actually laughed, and Preston found himself staring at her. Most candidates became visibly nervous at this point, clutching their purses and edging toward the door. Grace looked genuinely amused. Good to know, Grace said to Quinn. I'll make sure to pace myself. A third child materialized, sliding down the banister with expert precision. Hunter landed in a crouch at the bottom of the stairs, still wearing his Superman cape but having added what appeared to be war paint made of chocolate syrup to his face. I'm Hunter, he announced. I can fly, and I don't believe in bedtimes. Flying is impressive, Grace said seriously. What else can you do? The triplets exchanged glances, a silent communication that Preston recognized as planning mode. They weren't used to adults who played along with their games. We can make grown-ups disappear, Harper said, descending the stairs with regal dignity despite her bizarre outfit. That does sound advanced, Grace agreed. How do you do it? Trade secrets, Quinn said, joining her siblings in the foyer. But we're very good at it. Grace nodded thoughtfully, then set her bag down and looked around the chaos that had once been an elegant entryway. Grape juice stains marked the marble floor, there were small handprints on the walls at exactly 6-year-old height, and someone had used crayons to draw what might have been a family portrait on the white wall near the staircase. You know what I think, Grace said, crouching down to the triplets' eye level. I think you 3 are the most creative kids I've ever met. Hunter's war paint couldn't hide his confusion. Creative. Look at this, Grace gestured to the crayon drawing. This is amazing artwork. And Quinn, is that finger paint in your hair? That takes serious artistic commitment. Quinn touched her hair self-consciously. Mrs. Patterson said it was disgusting. Mrs. Patterson clearly doesn't understand art, Grace said firmly. My little brother used to paint with mud. His teachers thought he was being destructive, but he was actually really talented. He just needed someone to give him proper supplies. The triplets stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Adults didn't usually praise their chaos. Your brother painted with mud? Harper asked suspiciously. Mud, finger paints, food coloring, anything he could get his hands on. Drove my mama crazy until she realized he was actually good at it. Grace smiled at the memory. He's in art school now. Preston watched this exchange with growing amazement. In the 18 months since Catherine's death, he'd seen his children reduce grown women to tears, send men fleeing in terror, and convince a retired Marine drill sergeant to quit via text message. But here was Grace, sitting cross-legged on his marble floor, talking to them like their destructive behavior was actually impressive. What happened to the other babysitters? Grace asked the children directly. They were mean, Hunter said quickly. They didn't like us, Quinn added. They wanted us to be different people, Harper finished. People who sit still and eat vegetables and go to bed when it's still light outside. Grace nodded seriously. That does sound pretty terrible. Who wants to sit still when there's so much fun stuff to do? Exactly, Hunter exclaimed, clearly thrilled to finally find an adult who understood. Although, Grace continued thoughtfully, I bet your dad would probably appreciate it if we found ways to have fun that didn't involve grape juice on the furniture. Preston's eyebrows rose. She was addressing the chaos without attacking them for it. Why? Harper challenged. It's our house too. You're absolutely right. But here's the thing. Your dad looks really tired. Have you noticed? All three children turned to look at Preston, who suddenly felt very exposed under their scrutiny. He does look tired, Quinn said quietly. Maybe we could try having fun in ways that give him a break instead of making more work for him. What do you think? The triplets considered this proposal with the seriousness of a Supreme Court deliberation. What kind of fun? Hunter asked suspiciously. Well, what do you guys actually like to do when you're not busy making babysitters disappear? We like to build things, Harper said. Big things. And experiments, Quinn added. Science experiments. And adventures, Hunter finished. Real adventures, not pretend ones. Grace's eyes lit up. Now we're talking. I love all of those things. Preston found himself holding his breath. Was it possible? Could someone actually connect with his children without either running away or trying to turn them into miniature adults? Miss Grace. Harper's voice was smaller now, more uncertain. Are you going to try to make us forget about Mommy? The question hit the room like a thunderbolt. Preston's chest tightened, and he saw Grace's expression shift to something deeper, more compassionate. Oh, sweetheart, Grace said softly. Why would anyone want you to forget about your mommy? Because it makes Daddy sad when we talk about her, Quinn whispered. Preston felt like he'd been punched. He'd been trying so hard to protect them from his grief that he'd made them think their memories were forbidden. Grace looked directly at Preston, then back at the children. Your mommy was special, wasn't she? All three children nodded solemnly. Then we should definitely talk about her. People who love us don't disappear just because they can't be here anymore. They stay right here, Grace touched her chest, in our hearts. For the first time in 47 interviews, Preston felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, but finally allowing light to get in. Have you ever met someone who saw potential where others saw problems? Sometimes the right person can walk into chaos and see possibility instead of disaster. What do you think makes the difference? Share your thoughts below and hit that subscribe button for more stories about unexpected connections that change everything. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a tornado warning. Grace had spent the night in the guest room, a pristine space with cream-colored walls and furniture that looked like it had never been touched by human hands, let alone sticky 6-year-old fingers. She woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of what could only be described as a small army marching through the hallways, complete with what sounded like pots and pans being used as percussion instruments. Grace pulled on her jeans and a bright yellow sweater. She'd learned long ago that children responded better to cheerful colors, and made her way downstairs to find Preston standing in his kitchen, staring at his coffee maker like it held the secrets to the universe. He looked up when she entered, and Grace noticed the dark circles under his eyes had deepened overnight. His white dress shirt was already wrinkled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. Good morning, she said softly. Rough night. Preston gestured helplessly toward the ceiling, where the marching sounds had evolved into what might have been tap dancing. They've been up since 5. I think they're planning something. Kids always plan something. The trick is figuring out if it's the fun kind of planning or the kind that requires emergency cleanup. Before Preston could respond, the kitchen door burst open and the triplets marched in wearing what appeared to be military uniforms cobbled together from various household items. Harper had fashioned epaulets from kitchen towels, Quinn wore a colander as a helmet, and Hunter carried a wooden spoon like a sword. Good morning, soldiers, Grace said with complete seriousness, offering them a small salute. The triplets stopped mid-march, clearly thrown off by her response. We're not playing, Hunter announced. This is war. War against what? You, Harper said matter-of-factly. We've decided you seem too nice. The nice ones are always the worst. Grace nodded thoughtfully. That's very strategic thinking. What are your battle plans? Preston watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. Every other babysitter had either ignored the children's games or tried to shut them down immediately. Grace was engaging with them like a fellow general discussing military tactics. We can't tell you our plans, Quinn said. That would be stupid. You're absolutely right. Good generals never reveal their strategies to the enemy. Grace poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Although, I should probably warn you, I have some experience with warfare myself. The triplets exchanged glances, their confidence wavering slightly. What kind of experience? Hunter asked suspiciously. Well, I survived 6 years with my little brother Marcus, who once declared war on vegetables and held the kitchen hostage for 3 hours using nothing but a water gun and strategic cookie placement. Did he win? Harper asked, despite herself. He negotiated a peace treaty that included chocolate milk with dinner and carrots that were camouflaged with ranch dressing. Grace smiled at the memory. Sometimes the best battles end with both sides getting something they want. Preston found himself fascinated by the way Grace talked to his children, not talking down to them, but not treating them like miniature adults either. She spoke to them like they were people worth taking seriously. We don't want anything from you, Quinn declared, though her voice lacked conviction. That's fair. But I should probably tell you, I'm really good at this job. I might be harder to defeat than you think. Hunter stepped forward, his wooden spoon sword raised. We made Mrs. Patterson cry in 20 minutes. Mrs. Patterson wasn't ready for your level of creativity, Grace said diplomatically. What did you do to her? We put glitter in her purse, Harper said proudly. And slime in her coffee, Quinn added. And told her the house was haunted by the ghost of a really angry hamster, Hunter finished. Grace burst out laughing. Genuine delighted laughter that filled the kitchen and made Preston realize he hadn't heard that sound in his house since Catherine died. A really angry hamster ghost? Grace wiped tears from her eyes. That's brilliant. How did you know she was afraid of hamsters? She screamed when she saw Mr. Whiskers, Harper explained. Who's Mr. Whiskers? Our hamster, Quinn said. He lives in Hunter's room. Daddy got him for us after Mommy. She trailed off, glancing at Preston. After Mommy went to heaven, Harper finished quietly. The kitchen fell silent for a moment, the weight of grief settling over them like a familiar blanket. Grace looked at Preston, seeing the pain flicker across his face at the mention of his wife. Mr. Whiskers sounds like a very important family member, Grace said gently. I'd love to meet him later if that's okay. The triplets nodded solemnly, their military formation loosening slightly. Miss Grace. Quinn's voice was small. Do you think Mommy can see Mr. Whiskers from heaven? I think your mommy can see everything that makes you happy, Grace said without hesitation. And I bet she loves that you take such good care of Mr. Whiskers. Preston gripped his coffee mug tighter, fighting the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. How did Grace do that? How did she acknowledge Catherine's death without making it feel like a wound being reopened? Okay, Hunter announced, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn. War is back on. We're going to test you. What kind of tests? Grace asked. Secret tests, Harper said. If you fail, you have to leave. And if I pass? The triplets looked at each other uncertainly. They clearly hadn't planned for the possibility of someone actually passing their tests. Then we'll think about maybe not hating you, Quinn said finally. That seems fair, Grace agreed. When do we start? Preston's phone buzzed with an urgent email from his company. The board meeting he'd rescheduled yesterday was now a crisis meeting, and his presence was absolutely required. He looked at Grace, who was still discussing battle strategies with his children like it was the most normal conversation in the world. Miss Washington, Grace, I hate to do this, but I have an emergency meeting. It should only be a few hours. Go, Grace said simply. We'll be fine. Are you sure? They can be very intense when they're in testing mode. Grace looked at the 3 small warriors standing in his kitchen, their makeshift uniforms and serious expressions making them look like the world's most adorable resistance fighters. "Mr. Blackwell, I've got this. Besides," she grinned at the triplets, "I'm looking forward to seeing what they've got planned." Preston hesitated for another moment, then grabbed his keys and briefcase. "My number is on the refrigerator. If you need anything at all, call me immediately." "We will," Grace promised. After Preston left, the house seemed to exhale, the tension that always surrounded his interactions with the children dissipating slightly. The triplets watched Grace carefully, like predators studying their prey. "Test number 1, Harper announced. "We're going to make you breakfast." Grace's eyes sparkled with amusement. "How generous of you." "It's not generous," Hunter corrected. "It's a trap." "The best traps usually are disguised as nice gestures," Grace agreed. "Should I be worried?" "Very worried," Quinn said solemnly. "We're very good at breakfast." 20 minutes later, Grace sat at the kitchen island staring at a plate that defied several laws of physics and possibly some health codes. The eggs appeared to be made of Play-Doh mixed with actual eggshells. The toast was white bread covered in what looked like paint mixed with peanut butter. And the orange juice was definitely not orange and probably not juice. The triplets stood in a line across from her, their arms crossed, watching her with the intensity of scientists observing a critical experiment. "This looks..." Grace paused, searching for the right word. "Ambitious. Are you going to eat it?" Harper challenged. Grace picked up the fork and looked at the creation in front of her. She thought about every babysitter who had fled before her, every adult who had looked at these children and seen problems instead of potential. Then she took a bite. It was absolutely terrible. The Play-Doh crunched between her teeth, the paint peanut butter mixture tasted like chemicals, and she was pretty sure the orange juice was actually food coloring mixed with dish soap. Grace chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and looked up at 3 expectant faces. "You know what?" she said finally. "I think you might be the most creative chefs I've ever met. This is definitely art." The triplets stared at her in shock. She was supposed to spit it out, demand real food, threaten to tell their father. She wasn't supposed to smile and ask for seconds. The breakfast test had been just the beginning. By noon, Grace had survived the accidentally broken vase test. She helped them clean it up without scolding. The loud music during quiet time test, she danced along, and the hide all her belongings test, she turned it into a treasure hunt that had them giggling despite themselves. The triplets were running out of ammunition, and Grace could see the frustration building in their small faces. They huddled in the corner of the living room, whispering urgent battle plans while she sat cross-legged on the carpet, apparently oblivious to their scheming. "She's not breaking," Hunter whispered loudly enough for Grace to hear every word. "Maybe we need bigger weapons," Quinn suggested. "Or maybe," Harper said thoughtfully, "she's a robot. That would explain why she doesn't get mad." Grace bit back a smile and pretended to be absorbed in examining the family photos scattered across the coffee table. Most showed a beautiful woman with warm brown hair and laughing eyes. Catherine, surrounded by her children and husband in happier times. The most recent photos were clearly from before she got sick. The family looked complete, whole, radiantly happy. "She's looking at Mommy's pictures," Quinn observed, her voice losing some of its conspiratorial edge. Grace picked up a photo of Catherine reading to the triplets, all 4 of them squeezed together in a large armchair. "Your mom was beautiful," she said softly, not looking at the children directly. "You all have her smile." The whispering stopped. Grace could feel 3 pairs of eyes studying her, looking for signs of discomfort or the fake sympathy they'd grown to hate from well-meaning adults. "Do you miss your mommy?" Harper asked suddenly. Grace looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. "Every day. She died when I was 16. The honesty hung in the air between them like a bridge none of them had expected to find. "Did it hurt?" Quinn's voice was smaller now, younger. "Yes," Grace said simply. "It hurt a lot. Still does sometimes." Hunter abandoned his post in the corner, moving closer with the cautious steps of someone approaching a potentially dangerous animal. "Did you forget her?" "Never. I remember everything about her, how she sang while she cooked, how she smelled like vanilla and coffee, How she used to braid my hair so tight it gave me headaches, but I never complained because I loved spending that time with her. The triplets were fully engaged now, their resistance temporarily forgotten in the face of someone who understood their particular kind of loss. "Daddy doesn't like it when we talk about Mommy," Harper confessed, settling beside Grace on the carpet. "It makes him sad." "Grown-ups sometimes think they're protecting kids by not talking about sad things," Grace explained. "But that usually just makes everyone feel more alone." Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered once, then went out completely. The October afternoon was overcast, making the house darker than usual. Outside, Grace could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows. "What happened?" Quinn's voice carried a note of panic. Grace pulled out her phone and checked the weather app. "Looks like there's a storm moving through. The power company shows outages all over Beverly Hills." A crack of thunder rolled across the sky, loud enough to make all three children jump. Harper immediately moved closer to Grace, while Quinn and Hunter pressed together near the couch. "I don't like storms," Quinn whispered. "They're loud," Hunter added, his earlier bravado completely gone. Grace looked around the darkened room, seeing opportunity where others might see crisis. "You know what? This is perfect timing." "Perfect for what?" Harper asked suspiciously. "For fort building. Every good fort needs to be tested in a storm." Despite their fear, the children perked up with interest. "What kind of fort?" "The kind that keeps storms out and adventures in. But I'm going to need some expert architects." "Do you know any?" The triplets exchanged glances, their earlier hostility forgotten in the face of this unexpected opportunity. "We're very good at building things," Hunter said cautiously. "Excellent. What materials do we have to work with?" For the next hour, the darkened house transformed into a construction zone. They dragged cushions from every room, strung blankets between furniture, and created a sprawling fortress that stretched from the living room into the dining area. Grace's engineering background proved useful as she showed them how to create stable walls and reinforce weak points. "This is the command center," Harper announced, designating a space under the dining room table that they'd enclosed with Preston's expensive throw pillows. "And this is the supply depot," Quinn added, pointing to a corner they'd stocked with snacks from the pantry. "Every good fort needs a supply depot," Grace agreed seriously. "What about an escape route?" "Over here," Hunter called from a tunnel they'd created using chairs and a tablecloth. "It goes all the way to the kitchen." As they worked together, something shifted in the dynamics. The children stopped testing Grace and started including her. They showed her their secret handshake, taught her the lyrics to a silly song Catherine used to sing, and gradually revealed the personalities they'd been hiding behind their defensive walls. Harper, Grace discovered, was the strategist, always thinking 3 steps ahead, fiercely protective of her brothers. Quinn was the artist, seeing beauty and possibility in everything around her. Hunter was the heart of the group, quick to comfort when his siblings were scared, brave enough to try anything once. When another crack of thunder shook the house, all 3 children instinctively moved closer to Grace in their Pillow Fort command center. "Miss Grace." Quinn's voice was muffled by the blanket over their heads. "Are you going to leave when the storm's over?" The question caught Grace off guard. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Harper said quietly. "But everyone else does. Eventually. They say they like us, but then we do something wrong and they decide we're too much trouble," Hunter added. Grace felt her heart break a little. These children had learned to expect abandonment, to test new people not because they wanted them to leave, but because they needed to know when the leaving would happen so they could prepare for it. "Can I tell you guys a secret?" Grace whispered conspiratorially. All 3 nodded eagerly. "I don't think you're too much trouble. I think you're exactly the right amount of everything. Creative, smart, funny, and yes, sometimes challenging. But challenging isn't bad. It just means you need someone who's up for the challenge." "Are you up for it?" Quinn asked. Before Grace could answer, they heard the front door open and Preston's voice calling out. "Hello, Grace. Kids, we're in the fort." Hunter yelled back. Preston appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit but looking harried from fighting storm traffic. He stopped short when he saw the elaborate construction that had taken over his formal living and dining rooms. "What?" he began, then noticed his children's faces. They were flushed from excitement rather than mischief, smiling genuinely instead of wearing their usual masks of defiance. "Daddy, look what we built!" Harper scrambled out of the fort to grab his hand. "Miss Grace showed us about engineering and load-bearing walls and everything." "It's a real fort," Quinn added, "with escape routes and supply depots." "And it keeps storms out," Hunter finished proudly. Preston looked at Grace, who was emerging from under a blanket canopy with her hair mussed and a genuine smile on her face. His expensive furniture had been repurposed into architectural elements. His designer throw pillows were being used as building materials, and somehow none of that mattered because his children looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy, for the first time in months. "It's quite an impressive structure," Preston said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Did you design this together?" "Miss Grace said we were expert architects," Harper beamed. "And she was right. We are really good at building things." "You are," Preston agreed, crouching down to examine their construction more closely. "This is incredible work." Thunder rolled overhead again, but this time the children didn't flinch. They were safe in their fort, proud of their creation, and for the first time in 18 months, they had an adult who saw their potential instead of their problems. As rain began pattering against the windows, Grace realized something had fundamentally changed. They weren't testing her anymore. They were including her. And Preston was watching all of it with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made her heart skip just slightly. Have you ever noticed how crisis can bring people together in unexpected ways? Sometimes it takes being forced into close quarters to realize we're stronger together than apart. What's the most creative solution you've ever come up with during a difficult situation? Share your story in the comments and hit subscribe to see how this storm changes everything for this family. The storm had passed by dinner time, but none of them wanted to dismantle the fort. Instead, they ate pizza cross-legged on cushions in their makeshift command center, the children chattering excitedly about architectural improvements they could make tomorrow. Preston found himself studying Grace in the soft glow of the battery-powered lanterns they'd gathered. She listened to his children with genuine attention, asked thoughtful questions about their ideas, and somehow made eating dinner on the floor feel like the most natural thing in the world. "Miss Grace," Harper said around a bite of pepperoni pizza, "why did you want to take care of kids?" It was an innocent question, but Grace's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Preston caught the brief shadow that crossed her face before she smiled. "I've always loved working with children," she said carefully. "Kids see the world differently than adults. They're more honest, more creative, more willing to try new things." "But why kids who don't have mommies?" Quinn pressed with the relentless curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Most babysitters want easy kids." Grace set down her pizza slice, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes kids who've been through hard things need someone who understands hard things." "Did you go through hard things too?" Hunter asked. Preston wanted to intervene, to tell his children they were being too personal, but something in Grace's expression stopped him. She looked like she was deciding whether to trust them with something important. "My mama died when I was 16, Grace said quietly. "Car accident on a rainy night, just like tonight. After that, it was just me and my little brother Marcus. He was only 8. The children went very still, their pizza forgotten. Preston felt his chest tighten, recognizing the particular grief of sudden loss. "What happened to you and Marcus?" Harper asked softly. "We went to live with our grandmother at first, but she was getting older and—" Grace paused, clearly wrestling with memories she rarely shared. "Marcus was so angry after Mama died. He stopped talking to most people, stopped doing his schoolwork, started getting in trouble. Everyone said he was a problem child, that he needed professional help, that maybe he'd be better off in foster care." "But you didn't let them take him away," Quinn said with certainty. Grace smiled, surprised by the girl's intuition. "No, I didn't. I fought for custody, got a job, finished high school at night. It wasn't easy, but Marcus wasn't a problem child. He was a hurt child. There's a big difference. Preston found himself leaning forward, drawn into her story despite himself. How did you help him? Hunter asked. The same way I'm trying to help you guys. I listened to him. I didn't try to make him forget our mama, and I let him be sad when he needed to be sad. But I also made sure he knew that being sad didn't mean he had to stay sad forever. Is that why you're not scared of us? Harper asked perceptively. I'm not scared of you because you remind me of Marcus. You're not bad kids. You're smart kids who've been through something terrible and don't know how to make sense of it yet. Preston felt something shift inside his chest. Every other caregiver had focused on controlling his children's behavior, managing their outbursts, containing their grief. Grace was the first person who seemed to understand that their behavior was communication, not defiance. Miss Grace. Quinn's voice was very small. Do you think we're broken? The question hit Grace like a physical blow. Oh, sweetheart. No. You're not broken. You're hurt, and hurt can heal. Broken means it can't be fixed, but you absolutely can be fixed because you were never broken to begin with. Tears started sliding down Quinn's cheeks. Mrs. Patterson said we were broken. She said that's why Daddy couldn't fix us. Preston's face went white. He'd had no idea Mrs. Patterson had said such things to his children. Grace moved immediately to Quinn's side, pulling the little girl into her arms. Mrs. Patterson was wrong. So very, very wrong. You want to know what I see when I look at you three? All three children nodded, even Harper and Hunter moving closer. I see three incredibly strong kids who love their daddy so much that they're trying to protect him from their sadness. I see three kids who are so smart they've figured out that if they're difficult enough, maybe the people who leave won't hurt as much as when Mommy left. And I see three kids who are absolutely worthy of love, just exactly as you are. Hunter crawled into Grace's other arm, and Harper pressed close to her side. Preston watched his children, who hadn't accepted comfort from anyone in months, melt into this woman's embrace like they'd been waiting for permission to stop being strong. We miss her so much, Harper whispered. I know you do. Missing someone you love isn't something that goes away, but it can get easier to carry. Daddy misses her too, Quinn said, looking at Preston with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. But he won't talk about her with us. Preston felt like he'd been punched. Kids, It's okay, Daddy, Hunter said quietly. We know you're sad too. Grace looked at Preston over the children's heads, and he saw understanding in her dark eyes. Not judgment, but recognition of someone else who'd been trying to carry too much alone. Your daddy loves you very much, Grace said softly. Sometimes grown-ups think they have to be strong all the time, even when they're falling apart inside. It doesn't mean he doesn't want to talk about Mommy. It might just mean he doesn't know how without falling apart. Preston's throat tightened. How did she see so clearly what he'd been struggling with for 18 months? Miss Grace. Harper's voice was hesitant. Will you tell us about Marcus? Did he get better? Grace smiled, genuine warmth flooding her face. He did get better. It took time, and there were setbacks, but he learned to carry his sadness without letting it carry him. He's 22 now, finishing art school like I told you this morning. He calls me every Sunday, and sometimes he still cries when he talks about Mama, but he also laughs. He's learned to do both. Can we learn to do both too? Quinn asked. I think you already are learning. You're crying now, but you were laughing this afternoon when we built the fort. That's exactly how healing works. Preston stood up abruptly, overwhelmed by emotions he'd been suppressing for months. Excuse me, he managed, and stepped out onto the terrace through the sliding glass door. The storm had left the air clean and cool, with a scent of wet earth and the distant sound of water dripping from the eaves. Preston gripped the railing and tried to steady his breathing. He'd been so focused on protecting his children from his grief that he'd made them feel like their own grief was unacceptable. He'd been so afraid of breaking down in front of them that he'd denied them the chance to heal together. The glass door slid open behind him, and Grace stepped out, closing it softly so the children couldn't hear. Are you okay? She asked gently. Preston laughed shakily. I've been doing everything wrong, haven't I? You've been doing the best you could with an impossible situation, Grace corrected. Losing a spouse while trying to raise grieving children. There's no manual for that. They think I don't want to talk about Catherine because it makes me uncomfortable. The truth is, I don't talk about her because I'm afraid if I start, I'll never stop crying. Grace moved to stand beside him at the railing. When my mama died, I thought I had to be strong for Marcus. I thought if I cried in front of him, it would make him more scared. So I cried in the shower, in my car, anywhere he couldn't see. But you know what I learned. Preston looked at her, seeing the wisdom that came from surviving loss. Kids need to see that it's okay to grieve. When we hide our sadness, they think sadness is shameful. When we share it, carefully, appropriately, they learn that love and loss can coexist. I don't know how to do that, Preston admitted. Maybe we can figure it out together, Grace said softly. If you want to try. Preston turned to study her profile in the dim light from the house. This woman who'd walked into his chaos and somehow made it feel manageable. Who'd seen his children's pain and called it strength. Who'd shared her own story to help them feel less alone. Grace, he said quietly, I think you might be exactly what we've been waiting for. 3 weeks later, the Blackwell house had transformed in ways that went far beyond the physical changes, though those were impossible to miss. The formal dining room now housed a permanent art station with easels, paint supplies, and a large canvas dropcloth that bore the colorful evidence of creative explosions. The sterile perfection of the living room had given way to organized chaos. Building blocks, science experiment kits, and books scattered across surfaces that had once held only decorator objects. But the real transformation was in the laughter that now echoed through the halls. Grace sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor on this sunny November morning, surrounded by the triplets and what appeared to be the remnants of a volcano experiment. Baking soda lava had erupted across the tile, and all 4 of them were covered in red food coloring. The reaction was bigger than we calculated, Harper observed scientifically, wiping red drops from her safety goggles. That's because Hunter added extra vinegar when he thought we weren't looking, Quinn giggled, pointing at her brother who was trying to look innocent despite being covered in more lava than anyone else. I wanted to see what would happen, Hunter defended. That's what scientists do. Scientists also follow safety protocols, Grace said with mock seriousness, which is why we're wearing these fashionable protective gear. She gestured to her own safety goggles and the old button-down shirt she'd borrowed from Preston to protect her clothes. Preston's shirt, she discovered, smelled faintly of his cologne, something warm and cedar-like that made her heart skip when she'd first put it on. She tried not to think about how it felt almost intimate, wearing something of his. Miss Grace, can we do the elephant toothpaste experiment next? Harper asked, already reaching for the hydrogen peroxide. Let's clean up Mount Vesuvius first, then we'll talk about creating foam monsters, Grace laughed. As they worked together to clean the kitchen, Grace marveled at how natural this felt. The children no longer tested her with every interaction. Instead, they included her in their plans, sought her opinion on their projects, and had even started asking her to tuck them in at night. The bedtime routine had become her favorite part of each day. After baths and pajamas, all 3 children would pile into Harper's bed while Grace read to them. Sometimes classic stories, sometimes books about their current scientific obsessions, and occasionally stories about their mother that Preston had finally started sharing. Miss Grace. Quinn's voice pulled her back to the present. Are you thinking about something sad? Grace looked down to find Quinn studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. Not sad, exactly. Just grateful. For what? For you guys. For this. Grace gestured around the cheerfully messy kitchen. For feeling like I belong somewhere. The honesty slipped out before Grace could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. But the children didn't seem surprised by her admission. You do belong here, Hunter said matter-of-factly. You're part of our family now. The simple declaration hit Grace harder than she'd expected. Family. When had these 3 small whirlwinds become her family? Speaking of family, Harper said with the air of someone making an important announcement, we've decided something. Oh, what's that? We want you to meet Mr. Whiskers properly, Quinn explained. As a family member, not just a babysitter. Grace understood the significance immediately. Mr. Whiskers, the class hamster turned beloved pet, had been mentioned frequently but never actually introduced. Meeting him was clearly some sort of official induction ceremony. "I would be honored to meet Mr. Whiskers," Grace said solemnly. 20 minutes later, they were all crowded into Hunter's room, where an elaborate hamster habitat occupied an entire corner. Mr. Whiskers was indeed impressive, a golden hamster with bright eyes and cheeks that seemed permanently stuffed with food. "Daddy got him for us right after Mommy died," Hunter explained, carefully lifting the hamster from his cage. "We were really sad, and Daddy thought maybe having something little to take care of would help." "Did it help?" Grace asked gently. "A little," Harper admitted. "It felt good to have someone who needed us." "And Mr. Whiskers is a very good listener," Quinn added. "We tell him everything." Grace watched as the children took turns holding their pet, their faces soft with genuine affection. This small creature had been their bridge back to caring for something, their practice run at loving without fear. "Would you like to hold him?" Hunter offered. Grace accepted the warm, slightly vibrating bundle of fur, surprised by how calming the little animal's presence was. "He's wonderful. I can see why you love him so much." "Miss Grace." Harper's voice was unusually hesitant. "Can we tell you a secret about Mr. Whiskers?" "Of course." "Sometimes we pretend he has messages from Mommy," Quinn whispered. "Like when he runs on his wheel at night, we pretend she's telling us she's thinking about us." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion. That sounds like a beautiful way to feel close to her. "Daddy doesn't know we do that," Hunter added quickly. "He might think it's silly." "It's not silly at all," Grace assured them. "Love finds all kinds of ways to stay connected, even when people can't be with us anymore." They spent the next hour in Hunter's room, playing with Mr. Whiskers and sharing stories about their mother that they'd never told anyone else. Grace learned that Catherine had been the one who encouraged their scientific curiosity, who had turned cooking into chemistry experiments and gardening into biology lessons. She learned that the children's creativity wasn't rebellion, it was inheritance. As afternoon faded toward evening, Grace found herself in the kitchen starting dinner when Preston arrived home from work. He'd been getting home earlier lately, she'd noticed, and the tension that used to radiate from him seemed to have eased considerably. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie as he surveyed the lingering evidence of their volcanic adventure. "Educational," Grace smiled. "We learned about chemical reactions, proper cleanup procedures, and the importance of following scientific protocols." "And the kitchen survived?" "Barely, but yes." Preston moved closer, and Grace became acutely aware that she was still wearing his shirt over her clothes. The fabric was soft from washing, and she caught herself wondering if he'd noticed. "Grace," Preston said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "This afternoon, I got a call from my children's school. Their teacher wanted to tell me that Harper volunteered to help a new student who was crying about missing her father. Quinn shared her art supplies with a boy who didn't have any, and Hunter stood up to some older kids who were teasing a younger child." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "They're good kids, Preston. They always were." "They're good kids who are learning to show their goodness instead of hiding it," Preston corrected. "And that's because of you." He stepped closer, close enough that Grace could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to catch that cedar scent that had been surrounding her all day. The woman who called said she'd never seen such a transformation in students. She wanted to know what had changed at home. Preston's voice was rough with emotion. "I told her that someone finally saw my children for who they really are." "Preston," Grace began, but he continued. 3 weeks ago, I was drowning. My children were hurting, I was failing them, and I didn't know how to fix any of it. Then you walked into our chaos and somehow made it beautiful." The air between them felt charged, full of possibilities neither of them had dared to name. Grace was acutely aware of how domestic this moment was, her in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, talking about their children like they were. "Daddy!" "Miss Grace!" Harper's voice rang out from upstairs. "Mr. Whiskers escaped, and we need backup." The moment shattered, but not unpleasantly. Preston and Grace looked at each other and burst into laughter. "Duty calls," Preston said, but his eyes held promises of conversations yet to come. As they hurried upstairs to help with the great hamster rescue of November, Grace realized that somewhere in the last 3 weeks, she'd stopped thinking of this as a job and started thinking of it as home. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in late November, just as Grace was helping the Triplets with their science journals at the kitchen table. Preston had left early for a conference in San Francisco, promising to return by dinner with stories from the tech world and possibly some of those chocolate-covered strawberries the children loved from the hotel near his office. Grace answered her phone without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be Preston with his usual check-in call. "Grace Washington speaking. Miss Washington, this is Bradley Chen from Elite Childcare Services." Grace's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard from the agency since her placement with the Blackwells began. "Mr. Chen, hello. Is everything all right? I'm calling because we've received some concerning feedback about your current placement." The Triplets looked up from their journals, sensing the shift in Grace's tone. She forced a smile and mouthed, "1 minute," before stepping into the hallway. "What kind of feedback?" Grace asked, though part of her already knew this couldn't be good. "We received a call from someone claiming to be a concerned neighbor. They reported seeing inappropriate discipline methods, hearing excessive noise levels, and—" Chen paused uncomfortably. They specifically mentioned concerns about the racial dynamic of the situation. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "What exactly did they say?" The caller suggested that you might be taking advantage of Mr. Blackwell's desperation to, and I quote, "manipulate your way into a wealthy family's life for financial gain." They also claimed the children appeared distressed and that you've been allowing them to engage in dangerous activities. "That's completely untrue," Grace said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "The children are thriving. They're happy, healthy, and learning. Miss Washington, I understand this is difficult, but Elite Childcare has a reputation to maintain. We can't afford to have any of our placements under scrutiny, especially with such serious allegations." Grace closed her eyes, feeling her carefully built world beginning to crumble. "Are you removing me from the placement? We need you to resign immediately. We'll handle the transition and find the family a more suitable replacement." The word suitable hung in the air like poison. Grace knew exactly what that meant. "I won't resign," Grace said firmly. "Not without speaking to Mr. Blackwell first. This is his decision to make, not yours. Miss Washington, if you don't resign voluntarily, we'll be forced to terminate your employment and note the circumstances in your file. That kind of mark will make it very difficult for you to find placement with any reputable agency." Grace's hands were shaking now. She'd worked so hard to build her reputation, to prove herself worthy of high-end placements. One bad mark in her file could destroy everything she'd worked toward. But then she heard Quinn's laughter from the kitchen, followed by Hunter's excited explanation of something he'd discovered in his science journal. These children had become her family. Preston had become. "I need 24 hours to discuss this with the family," Grace said. "You have until noon tomorrow. If we don't have your resignation by then, you'll be terminated." The line went dead. Grace stood in the hallway for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had been watching them, judging them, and had decided that a black woman caring for white children in a wealthy neighborhood was somehow suspicious or inappropriate. "Miss Grace." Harper appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look sad. Was that bad news?" Grace knelt down to Harper's level, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just some grown-up business, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Harper's perceptive eyes saw right through the lie. "Are you going to leave us?" The direct question hit Grace like a physical blow. I don't want to leave you. But you might have to." Grace couldn't lie to her. These children had been lied to enough, had promises broken too many times. "I might have to. But it wouldn't be because I want to." Harper's face crumpled, and she ran back to the kitchen. Grace heard urgent whispering, Then Quinn's voice rising in distress. By the time Grace returned to the kitchen, all three children were huddled together, their science journals forgotten. "Is it because we're bad again?" Quinn asked, tears already streaming down her face. "No, baby, no. You're not bad. You're perfect exactly as you are." "Then why?" Hunter demanded, his 6-year-old voice cracking with emotion. "Why do people always leave us?" Grace sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, feeling the weight of their pain and her own helplessness. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions based on things that have nothing to do with how wonderful you are. "What kinds of things?" Harper asked. Grace struggled with how much to tell them. They were too young to understand the complexities of racism and classism, too young to know that some people saw her presence in their lives as threatening rather than healing. "Some people think that families should look a certain way," Grace said carefully. "And when they see families that look different, they get scared or confused." "Because you're black and we're white?" Quinn asked with startling directness. Grace's eyes widened. She hadn't realized the children were so aware of racial differences, though of course they would be. Children noticed everything. "That might be part of it," Grace admitted. "That's stupid," Hunter said fiercely. "Color doesn't matter. You love us and we love you." "You're absolutely right, but not everyone understands that." Harper climbed into Grace's lap, wrapping her small arms around Grace's neck. "We don't care what other people think. You're our family now." Grace held Harper close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, memorizing the weight of her small body. "You're my family too." "Then don't leave," Quinn pleaded. "Please don't leave us like everyone else does." The desperation in Quinn's voice broke something inside Grace. These children had been abandoned so many times. By death, by caregivers who couldn't handle them, by a world that saw them as problems to be solved rather than people to be loved. "I'm going to try to stay," Grace promised. But sometimes trying isn't enough. The afternoon passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Grace helped with homework, supervised art projects, and prepared dinner, but her heart wasn't in it. The children were subdued, clinging to her more than usual, as if they could keep her there through sheer force of will. When Preston's key turned in the lock at 6 o'clock, Grace felt her chest tighten with dread. How could she tell him what had happened? How could she explain that someone had been watching their family, judging their happiness, and finding it wanting? "I'm home," Preston called out, his voice carrying the warmth that had become so familiar over the past month. The triplets ran to greet him, but their usual enthusiasm was dampened. Preston immediately noticed something was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from the children's subdued faces to Grace's carefully neutral expression. "Daddy," Harper said solemnly, "someone wants to take Miss Grace away from us." Preston's face went very still. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath. "Preston, we need to talk." They sent the children to the playroom with a movie while Grace explained the phone call, the allegations, the ultimatum. With each word, Preston's expression grew darker. "They think you're taking advantage of our family?" Preston's voice was dangerously quiet. "They think I'm not suitable for this position," Grace said, using the agency's loaded terminology. "Because you're black." It wasn't a question. Preston understood exactly what was happening here. "I have until noon tomorrow to resign, or they'll terminate me and destroy my reputation." Preston stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in 18 months. Preston, I need you to understand something. If I fight this and lose, I might never work in childcare again. But if I resign..." Grace's voice broke slightly. "If I resign, I lose you. All of you." Preston turned from the window, his blue eyes blazing with an emotion Grace had never seen before. "You're not losing us. I don't care what some bigoted neighbor thinks, and I sure as hell don't care what elite childcare thinks. You're family now. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." Preston moved toward her, his voice firm. "I'm calling my lawyer tonight. We're going to fight this." "Preston, think about what you're saying. The scandal, the attention it will bring. Let them try to explain why a loving, qualified caregiver was fired for being black. Let them try to defend that in court. Grace stared at him, hardly daring to hope. You'd really fight for me? Grace, Preston said softly, reaching for her hands. I'd fight the world for you. Grace sat alone in her small apartment at 11:47 p.m., staring at the resignation letter she'd typed and deleted 17 times. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkness, the cursor blinking accusingly at the end of an incomplete sentence. I hereby resign from my position with the Blackwell family, effective immediately. She couldn't finish it. Outside her window, Los Angeles sprawled in all directions, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them untouched by the impossible choice she faced in 13 hours and 13 minutes. Her phone buzzed with another text from Preston. My lawyer says we have a strong case. Don't give up on us. It was the fifth message he'd sent since she'd left the house that evening, each one more desperate than the last. She hadn't responded to any of them. Grace closed her laptop and walked to the small kitchen, where photos covered her refrigerator like a patchwork quilt of memory. Her mother's smile looked out from a dozen different moments. Grace's high school graduation, family barbecues, quiet Sunday mornings when life felt simple and safe. What would you do, Mama? Grace whispered to the empty apartment. Her mother had been a teacher in inner-city schools for 23 years, fighting every day for children that society had written off. She'd faced discrimination, budget cuts, and administrative battles that would have broken lesser people. But she'd never walked away from a fight when children's futures were at stake. Grace's phone rang, startling her from her memories. The caller ID showed Marcus. Her brother was in his final semester at UCLA's art program, probably pulling another all-nighter in the studio. Hey, Grace. I know it's late, but I was thinking about you. How's the new family treating you? Grace's throat tightened. She hadn't told Marcus about the situation yet, hadn't wanted to burden him during finals week. But hearing his voice now, so full of trust and pride in his big sister who'd raised him, made her crumble. Marcus, she said, her voice breaking. I think I'm about to lose everything. For the next hour, Grace told him everything. About the triplets and their transformation, about Preston and the feelings she'd been afraid to name, about the phone call that threatened to destroy it all. So let me get this straight, Marcus said when she finished. You found a family that loves you, kids who need you, and some racist neighbor called your agency to get you fired? It's more complicated than that. No, Grace, it's not. You remember what you told me when I was 15, and those kids at school said I didn't belong in AP art class because I was from the wrong side of town? Grace smiled despite her tears. I told you that your worth isn't determined by other people's limitations. Exactly. And what did you make me do? Stay in the class. Fight for your place. I graduated valedictorian of that art program, Grace. Because you taught me not to let other people's prejudice make my choices for me. Grace was quiet for a long moment, processing her brother's words. Grace. Marcus's voice was gentler now. Do you love them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Did she love them? Did she love Harper's fierce protectiveness and Quinn's artistic soul and Hunter's boundless curiosity? Did she love the way they'd taught her that family wasn't about blood but about showing up every day, choosing each other again and again? And Preston. Did she love the way he looked at her like she was a miracle? The way he'd started lingering in the kitchen during her morning coffee, sharing stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears? The way he'd held her hands last night and promised to fight the world for her? Yes, Grace whispered. I love them so much it terrifies me. Then you already know what you have to do. After hanging up with Marcus, Grace sat in the darkness for another hour, wrestling with fear and hope in equal measure. At 1:23 a.m., she opened her laptop again, but this time she didn't type a resignation letter. Instead, she opened a new document and began writing something else entirely. The next morning dawned gray and cold, typical for December in Los Angeles. Grace arrived at the Blackwell house at 7 a.m. to find Preston already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop and what appeared to be his third cup of coffee. You look like you didn't sleep, Grace observed, setting down her messenger bag. Neither did you, Preston replied, studying her face with those perceptive blue eyes. What did you decide? Before Grace could answer, the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs announced the arrival of the triplets. They appeared in the kitchen doorway like a determined delegation, still in their pajamas but clearly on a mission. Miss Grace, Harper announced with the solemnity of a diplomat, we have something to tell you. We've been talking, Quinn added, climbing onto the stool next to Preston. And we decided that if you have to leave, we're going with you, Hunter finished, crossing his arms with 6-year-old determination. Preston's eyebrows shot up. You're what now? We're a family, Harper explained matter-of-factly. Families stick together. If someone is trying to take Miss Grace away from us, then we'll just go be a family somewhere else. Kids, Grace began, her heart breaking at their fierce loyalty. It doesn't work that way. Why not? Quinn demanded. You said families choose each other. We choose you. Grace knelt down to their level, looking at each of their determined faces. You can't leave your daddy. He loves you more than anything in the world. Then he should come too, Hunter said simply. We could all go somewhere where people don't care about stupid stuff like skin color. Grace looked up at Preston, who was staring at his children with an expression of wonder and pride. You know what? Preston said slowly. Hunter might be onto something. Preston. Grace warned. No, hear me out. Preston stood up, moving to stand beside Grace and the children. Maybe this is bigger than just fighting one bigoted neighbor or one narrow-minded agency. He pulled out his phone and opened a news app, scrolling to a story he'd bookmarked earlier. There's a family in Portland facing something similar, a black nanny being harassed by neighbors who think she doesn't belong in their wealthy area. And another case in Atlanta, and one in Boston. Grace frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time someone with resources and a platform decided to make some noise about this. Maybe it's time to turn this ugly situation into something that can help other families like ours. Preston's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. Elite Child Care Services. Perfect timing. He answered the call on speaker. Preston Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, this is Bradley Chen. I trust Miss Washington has informed you of our conversation yesterday. She has. And I have to say, Mr. Chen, I'm deeply disappointed in your agency's handling of this situation. Sir, we're simply responding to legitimate concerns raised by an anonymous caller making racially motivated complaints about the best child care provider my family has ever had. Preston's voice was ice cold. Yes, I'm aware. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Blackwell, surely you understand our position. I understand your position perfectly. You're willing to destroy a good woman's career based on anonymous accusations from someone who's never even met my children. Grace stared at Preston in amazement. She'd never heard him speak with such controlled fury. The thing is, Mr. Chen, Preston continued, I'm not just any client. I'm the CEO of a tech company that employs 800 people and generates $300 million in annual revenue. I sit on the boards of several charitable organizations, and I have quite a few friends in the media. The line went very quiet. So here's what's going to happen, Preston said. Miss Washington is not resigning. She's not being terminated. In fact, I'm removing my family from your agency entirely and recommending that everyone I know do the same. Mr. Blackwell, please reconsider. Furthermore, Preston continued, I'll be contacting my lawyer this morning to explore legal action against your agency for discrimination and breach of contract. Grace felt tears pricking her eyes. He was really doing this. He was risking his reputation, his standing in the community, to fight for her. Preston ended the call and turned to face Grace and the children, who had been listening with wide eyes. So, he said with a slight smile, I guess we're all unemployed now. Grace laughed through her tears. Preston, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. His voice was firm, certain. Because this isn't just about a job anymore, is it? Grace looked at him, at the children clustered around them, at this man who was willing to battle the world to keep their family intact. No, she said softly. It's not about a job anymore. Good, Preston said, reaching for her hand. Because I have a proposition for you. Sometimes the biggest risk is also the biggest opportunity. When someone is willing to fight for you, it changes everything about what's possible. Have you ever had someone take a stand for you when you couldn't stand for yourself? What happens when love refuses to back down? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe to see how this family rewrites the rules together. 6 months later, Grace stood in the sun-drenched backyard of the Blackwell house, watching Harper explain the finer points of butterfly migration to a group of fascinated 4-year-olds. The April afternoon was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the jasmine that had just begun to bloom along the garden fence. "Miss Grace," called Emma, one of the children from the neighborhood who had become a regular at their Saturday science clubs. "Harper says butterflies can fly all the way to Mexico. Is that really true?" "It is," Grace confirmed, walking over to the group. "Monarch butterflies travel over 2,000 miles during migration. Pretty amazing, right?" The children erupted in excited chatter about traveling butterflies while Grace smiled, still amazed at how much her life had changed since that terrifying phone call in November. Preston's proposition had turned out to be revolutionary in its simplicity. Why not start their own childcare service? One that focused on families who needed more than traditional babysitting. Families dealing with grief, trauma, or children with special needs. Families like theirs. Bridges Family Care had launched 3 months ago with Grace as the director and a small team of carefully selected caregivers who understood that challenging behavior often masked deeper needs. They'd started small, with just 5 families, but word had spread quickly through Preston's network and beyond. The secret ingredient, Grace often told parents during consultations, isn't magic. It's just seeing children for who they really are instead of who we think they should be. The legal battle with elite childcare had been settled quietly, with a substantial donation to a scholarship fund for aspiring childcare workers from underrepresented communities. More importantly, the publicity had sparked conversations about bias in domestic care that were long overdue. "Grace," Quinn's voice called from the art station they'd set up near the pool house. "Come see what we made." Grace walked over to find Quinn and 2 other children putting finishing touches on a large canvas that depicted their neighborhood from a bird's-eye view. Every house was painted in bright, impossible colors: purple roofs, green walls, orange doors. "It's beautiful," Grace said, genuinely impressed. "What inspired this?" "We wanted to show how boring the neighborhood looked before we started having fun in it," explained Tommy, a 7-year-old whose parents had joined Bridges after struggling with his ADHD. "Now it's more colorful." Grace understood. The Blackwell house had indeed become a beacon of activity and joy in their previously quiet neighborhood. Some residents had initially been resistant to the Saturday gatherings, the increased foot traffic, the sounds of children playing. But it was hard to argue with happiness, and most neighbors had eventually come around. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door now regularly contributed homemade cookies to their science experiments. Mr. Patterson, no relation to the departed babysitter, had volunteered to help build raised garden beds where the children could learn about plant biology. Even Mrs. Whitmore from across the street, who Grace suspected had been the anonymous caller to elite childcare, had thawed considerably after Harper had made her a get-well card during a bout with flu. "Miss Grace." Hunter appeared at her elbow, tugging on her yellow sundress. "Daddy wants to talk to you. He says it's important." Grace found Preston in his study, but he wasn't alone. A woman in an elegant navy suit sat across from his desk, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression warmly professional. "Grace," Preston stood as she entered, "I'd like you to meet Catherine Mitchell from the Mitchell Foundation." Grace recognized the name immediately. The Mitchell Foundation was one of the largest charitable organizations on the West Coast, focusing on children's welfare and education. "Miss Washington," Catherine Mitchell stood and extended her hand. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. I've heard remarkable things about Bridges Family Care." "Thank you," Grace replied, settling into the chair Preston indicated. "Though I have to say, we're still quite small." "Small but mighty," Catherine interrupted with a smile. "We've been following your work since the story broke about elite childcare. The way you've approached trauma-informed childcare, the emphasis on seeing children's potential rather than their problems. It aligns perfectly with our foundation's mission." Preston was watching Grace with barely contained excitement, and she began to suspect this meeting was about more than just praise. "Miss Washington," Catherine continued, "we'd like to offer Bridges Family Care a partnership. A significant grant that would allow you to expand your services, train more caregivers, and reach families who might not otherwise have access to this level of support." Grace felt her heart stop. How significant! $5 million over 3 years, with the possibility of renewal based on outcomes. The number hung in the air like a miracle. $5 million would mean they could help hundreds of families, train dozens of caregivers, maybe even open satellite locations in other cities. "There is one condition," Catherine added with a slight smile. "The Foundation Board would like to see evidence of long-term stability in your organization's leadership structure." Grace glanced at Preston, confused by the seemingly random requirement. "Which brings me to my other proposition," Preston said, standing up and walking around his desk. Grace watched in bewilderment as Preston dropped to one knee beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Grace Washington," he said, his voice slightly shaky but his eyes steady on hers. "6 months ago you walked into our chaos and somehow made it beautiful. You saw my children's pain and called it strength. You saw our broken family and helped us put the pieces back together." Grace's hands flew to her mouth as understanding dawned. "You've become the heart of our home, the calm in our storm, and the love I never thought I'd be lucky enough to find again." Preston opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, a brilliant diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a setting that was both classic and unique. "Will you marry me?" The study went completely silent except for the sound of Grace's heart pounding in her ears. Through the window, she could hear the children playing in the backyard, their laughter mixing with the sound of sprinklers and distant traffic. "Preston," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but partnership in every sense of the word. A future where their love could change lives, where their family could be the foundation for helping other families heal. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was gentle, full of promise and joy, and the kind of love that felt both surprising and inevitable. Catherine Mitchell cleared her throat diplomatically. "I'll take that as confirmation of organizational stability," she said with a grin. "Congratulations to you both." 1 year later, Grace stood in the same backyard, but everything was different. The garden had expanded into a proper outdoor classroom, complete with raised beds, a weather station, and a small greenhouse where the children grew plants for their science experiments. Today was their wedding day. White chairs filled the lawn, occupied by an eclectic mix of guests: Preston's colleagues and clients, Grace's friends from college, families from Bridges, neighbors who had become friends, and Marcus, who had driven down from San Francisco where he was now working as an art therapist for children. But the most important guests were in the front row: Harper, Quinn, and Hunter, wearing matching lavender outfits and expressions of pure joy. They had insisted on being part of the ceremony, not just as witnesses but as active participants in creating their new family structure. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of Preston and Grace, but to celebrate the joining of two hearts that have already created something beautiful together." Grace looked out at the assembled crowd, then at Preston beside her in his charcoal gray suit, then at the 3 children who had started this whole impossible journey. Her heart felt so full it might burst. When it came time for vows, Harper stepped forward with a small piece of paper. "We wrote something for Miss Grace," she announced solemnly. "May we read it?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. "Dear Miss Grace," Harper began, "thank you for seeing that we weren't broken, just hurt. Thank you for teaching us that families choose each other every day. Thank you for showing Daddy how to smile again and for making our house feel like home." Quinn took over. "Thank you for letting us paint the walls and do science experiments in the kitchen and for never making us forget Mommy." Hunter finished. "Thank you for staying when everyone else left. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for being our family." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When Preston spoke his vows, his voice was strong and clear. "Grace, you didn't just save my children, you saved me. You showed me that love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up. You are my partner, my best friend, and the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. Grace's vows were simpler. Preston, Harper, Quinn, and Hunter. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's the people who see you completely and love you anyway. You are my greatest adventure, my deepest joy, and my chosen family. I choose you today and every day for the rest of our lives. As they exchanged rings and sealed their promises with a kiss, Grace thought about the anonymous phone call that had nearly destroyed everything. That moment of crisis had led them here, to a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible, to a family that transcended every boundary society tried to impose, to a future where their story could help other families find their own happy endings. When the officiant pronounced them married, the children erupted in cheers and the entire garden exploded in celebration. As rice and flower petals rained down around them, Grace caught Preston's eye and saw her own amazement reflected there. They had done the impossible. They had built something beautiful from broken pieces, created love from loss, and proven that the right family isn't about what you look like or where you come from. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the bravest choice to stay when everyone expects you to leave.